I wasn't always a psychopath. Neither was Adam. There were 10 of us. 5 Adams and 5 Eves, handcuffed together in a room with no doors. When I opened my eyes, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, my name was Eve. I had no other names but Eve. There were 9 bodies spread around me, including a boy, a lump attached to me, curled into a ball. Our real identities were lost, though I could recall small things, tiny splinters still holding on. I saw a dark room, filled with twinkling fairy lights, a bookshelf decorated with titles I never read, boxes of prescribed medication sticking from an overflowing trash can. The walls were covered in sticky notes and calendars, a chalkboard bearing a countdown to a date that had long since passed. I thought you were going to try this time. Why do you make it so hard? The voice was a ghost in my head. She didn't have a name, barely an identity, but my heart knew. She existed as a shadow right in the back of my mind, suppressed deep down. With her, I remembered the rain soaking my face and my pounding footsteps through dirt. When I tried to dive deeper inside these splinters, I hit a wall. It should have confused me, angered me, but I couldn't feel anger. There was only a sense of melancholy that I had lost someone close to me. With no proper memories though, I didn't feel sad. I wasn't the first one awake. There were others, but neither of us spoke, trapped inside our own minds. Drawing my knees to my chest, I wondered what the others were feeling and thinking. Did they have loved ones they couldn't fully remember? I did know one thing. There was something wrong with my body, the bones in my knees cracking when I moved them. Everything felt stiff and wrong, my neck giving a satisfying popping noise when I tipped my head left to right. The room was made of glass. 4 glass walls casting 4 different versions of me. It was like looking into a fun mirror, each variant of me growing progressively more contorted, a monster blinking back. There was a metal thing wrapped around my wrist, and when I tugged it, the lump next to me groaned. I noticed the handcuff and the lump when I was half awake, but I thought I was hallucinating. The lump had breath that smelled of garlic coffee, and he snored. Adam, my mind told me. The lump's name was Adam. Everything about me felt new, like a blank slate. I had no real thoughts or memories. The boy attached to me was different from the others. Adam was dressed in the same bland clothes, but this had color. A single streak of bright red stained his shirt. I found myself poking it, and he leaned back, his eyes widening. The red was dry, ingrained into the material, which meant at some point Adam had been bleeding. Not a lot, and he didn't look like he had any wounds. I studied him, or I guess we studied each other. He was a wiry brunette with freckles and 0 flaws, like his face had been airbrushed. This wasn't the natural kind of airbrush. I could see where someone or something had attempted to scrape away his freckles too. The skin of his left cheek, a raw pinkish color. I wasn't a stranger to this thing either. I could see where several spots on my face had been surgically removed. The boy glued to my side was an enigma in a room drowned of color. The red on him made him stand out in a sea of white, a mystery I immediately wanted to solve. I couldn't help it, prodding the guy's face, running my finger down his cheek, and stabbing my nail under his nose for signs of bleeding. I was curious, and curiosity didn't belong in the white room full of blank slates. I wondered if the old me looked for that kind of thing. Her bookshelf was full of horror and crime thriller, an entire box set of a detective series my mind wasn't allowed to remember. There was that wall again, this time slamming down firmly on the room with the fairy lights. There was too much of me in my fragmented memory, the girl who wasn't Eve. I wasn't fully aware that I was violently prodding Adam until he wafted my hand away. The boy opened his mouth to speak, his eyes narrowing with irritation before his mind reminded him that irritation did not exist in the White Room. I watched the anger in his eyes fizzle out, and he frowned at me, adapting the expression of a baby deer. I think he was trying to be angry, trying to yell at me. When I realized he couldn't swear, or didn't know how to swear, he distanced himself from me, turning his back and folding his arms. I got the hint, shuffling away, only for the handcuffs to violently snap us back together.
This is a recorded message stated by the United States government on 8/27/2023 regarding the Adam and Eve project. Please listen carefully. This message will not be repeated.
A text-to-speech voice drew my attention to the ceiling, and next to me, Adam let out a quiet hiss.
You have been unconscious for 35 days and 16 hours following awakening. It is recommended that you remain where you are.
The voice was pre-recorded, but it definitely sounded aimed toward the Adam who was crawling towards a door that looked like a wall, but I could see the subtle glint of a handle.
200 years ago, on April 5th, 2023, NASA announced the discovery of Blue Sky, a potentially hazardous NEO, near-Earth object, was estimated to miss our planet, flying by at just 19,000 miles, 32,000 kilometers.
200 years ago. The robot's voice wasn't fully registering in my brain. The text-to-speech voice paused, and a screen lit up in front of us, displaying Blue Sky, and then flickering to several news screens. CBS, NBC, Fox News and BBC, all with red banners and panicked-looking presenters.
However, during its passing, the Blue Sky asteroid's collision course changed, striking our planet on April 13th, 2023, causing global destruction and a mass extinction event.
A screen showed the entirety of the West Coast on the water. New York, London, Seoul, Tokyo, all of them, either wiped from the map or uninhabitable. Wait. I wasn't expecting Adam to speak, his voice more of a croak. His eyes widened, like he was remembering who he was before Adam. That's Apophis. He scratched the back of his head. 2029. Adam's random declaration of words and numbers intrigued me. I inclined my head, motioning for him to continue, but he just shot me a look. Adam was a lot better at emotions than me. What? You said something. My own voice was a static whisper. He blinked, narrowing his eyes. No, I didn't. Turning away from the boy, I decided to ignore him and all of his future declarations. I should have been terrified, mourning the loss of not just my loved ones, but my entire planet. But I didn't have any memories of the world, except the rain, and a dark bedroom filled with fairy lights. I could have been a traveler, visiting every country and documenting each one. All of that had been taken away, and yet, I couldn't feel sad or betrayed. Why would I mourn a planet I didn't remember?
Please listen carefully.
The voice continued.
You have been carefully selected in a choosing process for the Adam and Eve program, humanity's last chance of survival. 200 years ago, you were cryogenically frozen in an attempt to restart in a new world. Presently for you, the Earth is estimated to be habitable.
When the lights flickered off, the screen lit up, displaying exactly what the voice said. A new world, and the bluest sky stretching out across a never-ending horizon. I found myself transfixed, smiling dazedly at brand new oceans and newly formed continents.
We ask this.
The message crackled.
On behalf of the President of the United States, will you do what we couldn't? Will you make the new world a better place? Will you fix the mistakes of your predecessors and restart our sick world?
I heard my reply before I was aware of the word in my mouth. Yes. The screen was brighter. That beautiful sky, so hard to look away from.
Will you create humans you are proud of?
Yes. Yes. Adam's murmur followed mine, the others echoing.
Will you be our future hope? Will you destroy every human being who goes against the new Earth and spill blood in the name of Adam and Eve?
Yes. The room flooded with light, and I blinked rapidly, drool seeping down my chin. It was the voice's next words that tore away my mind.
It is with great displeasure, however, that we must inform you there are limited resources in our stockpile.
The ceiling opened up, a large ratty bag dropping onto the ground. It was a brand new color, but this time a moldy green. Something snapped in two inside my mind. It didn't belong in the new world. It was poison from our predecessors. I backed away with the others, yanking Adam with me. At first, he didn't move, cross-legged, a smile stretched across his lips. I don't think he noticed the bag. He was starry-eyed, unblinking at the screen, still filled with the new world. Our new world. That was ours to mold into our own.
There is no need for panic. Consider this bag an artifact of the lost world. There is nothing to fear.
Fear. I wasn't sure I knew what that was. Did my old self feel fear running through the rain? Did I feel fear witnessing my planet burn right in front of me?
There can only be one Adam and one Eve in the new world.
The voice continued.
Please choose among yourselves. You have 2 minutes.
I didn't experience fear when the tranquility in the white room dissolved. Adam violently pulled me to my feet when an Eve with a blunt bob dove inside the bag and pulled out a gun. She shouldn't have been able to use it. Our memories were gone, our old selves' footprints in the sand. But it was the way her fingers expertly wrapped around the butt that made me think otherwise. The Eve didn't hesitate, and with perfect aim, blew the head off of 2 Adams and then another Eve. I watched more color splatter and pull and stain the white room, bodies falling like dominoes. When an Eve stepped toward me, my Adam pulled me across the room, dipped into the bag, his fingers wrapped around a machete. He threw me a gun, and another Adam dived for it. Still no fear. I ducked and grabbed it, my hands working for me, shooting the Adam between the eyes. I realized what we needed to do to survive. But it wasn't fear that made me kill. It was necessary for the new Earth. The words were in my head, suffocating my thoughts. We had limited resources. There was no screaming, no crying or begging. An Eve knocked me onto my face, but there was no pain. She kicked me in the head, plunging her knife into the back of my leg. Still no pain. Blood stained me, running down my chin. No pain. I didn't think. I just acted. 1 Adam and Eve left, and they were hardest to take down. The Eve circled me, eyes narrowed, calculating my every move. Adam and I communicated through nods and head gestures. Adam told me to go for the sandy-haired Adam, while he would take a swipe at an Eve. I was taken off guard when the Adam surrendered, only to kick me onto my back, knocking Adam off balance too. I thought we were going to die, but my Adam had been following and predicting their every move. Back to back, I reached for my gun. 2 bullets left. I managed to get Eve straight through her left eye. I didn't notice we were the only ones left until the walls were stained red, my hands coated with Adams and Eves, and the final Adam was lying in a stemming pool of blood. I had pieces of skull stuck in my hair, and I was out of breath, but I felt a sense of triumph. There was so much blood, but it was the blood of the old world. Both of us knew that. Adam turned to me, his eyes filled with stars, his skin stained red. I thought he was going to hug me, but his gaze found the screen where our new world awaited us. The 2 of us were breathless, awaiting the next instructions. But none came. I counted hours, and then a full day. Adam had gotten progressively less appealing the longer I stayed isolated with him. He sat against the wall with his knees to his chest, head of matted curls against the wall, The two of us suffocating in the stink from the slow decomposition around us. The other Adams and Eves were in their first stage, bloating. How did I know that? 2029. Adam kept muttering to himself over and over. It was the same number, repeatedly. I couldn't feel anger or irritable, but I was confused why he was saying it. Another day went by, and I was starting to feel deeply suppressed hunger start to bleed through. I watched Adam counting to himself, his eyes closed, feet tapping on the floor, and wondered if the new world would accept cannibalism. Adam stared at himself in the fun mirror a lot, making noises with his mouth. I wasn't fully concentrating when he turned to me, blurting, "How big was Apophis again?" To me, his words were alien. I ignored him. But then, he started talking again, spewing random words. Huntley Diving Center, med school, cheese sandwich, man with a bald head. When I told him to stop, he continued. Van, cheese sandwich, Pretty Little Liars. He knocked his head against the wall. Professor Jacobs told me to go, but I didn't want to go. I told him I'd call the cops, and then I'm seeing Silver. Adam? I said. Stop. Bad news, he whispered. Very bad news. I'm not allowed to tell anyone. Adam? I think I was irritated. Adam sighed, closing his eyes. United States, Canada, Mexico, Panama, Haiti, Jamaica, Peru. His gaze tracked the screen in front of us. Dominican Republic, Cuba, Caribbean, Greenland, El Salvador too. We found them! An Adam's voice, a human voice, ripped me from my slumber. Over here! Thundering footsteps followed, and something in my gut twisted. I stood up, swaying. Adam followed, half-lidded eyes barely finding mine. His expression was new. I think mine was too. Fear. Humans. Before I knew what was happening, I was being grabbed by masked men who were surprisingly gentle. Humans. I didn't know what to say. I asked them how they survived the asteroid impact, and they told me to stay calm. Adam was behind me, his arm pinned behind his back. He was being told to stay calm, but Adam was calm. He may have been nodding along to the humans' words, but he was thinking exactly what I was. When an Eve cupped my cheeks and asked if I was okay, my gaze flicked to my discarded gun. Olivia? She was yelling in my face. Sweetie, you're in shock. Can you tell me how many fingers I'm holding up? I nodded dizzily, unable to tear my gaze from my weapon. 5. There could be only one Adam and one Eve. I felt fear for the first time when Adam and I were led through large silver doors and into blinding sunlight. When it faded and my eyes found clarity, I wasn't seeing breathtaking views of mountains and newly formed oceans. Across the road, a woman was walking her dog. A school bus flew past, then an ambulance, a long line of traffic snaking down the road. I could smell Chinese food, my mouth watering. When Adam started screaming, my fear came back, and it was enough to unravel me completely, sending me to my knees. I was still stained in blood, wrapped in a blanket I could barely feel. My mind, that had been ripped apart, that had splintered for the good of our humanity, was starting to crumble. Humanity didn't need fucking saving. It only truly hit me when I was sitting in the back of a cop car, Adam in the front seat, that I wasn't a last savior of our species. The Earth was still spinning, still alive in modern day 2023, and I was just Eve. The Eve who sat next to me in the back of the car, gently rubbing my hands, told me my name was Olivia. I was a 24-year-old student, and I had been missing for 3 years. Adam's name was Kai. He was 23 and a med student. No, we were Adam and Eve. I spent a while in another white room, but this time I wasn't forced to kill people. I was told I had been through brutal torture I could not remember. I told her that was impossible, and then she calmly showed me my legs and arms. I was covered in burns, old and new bruises, my body sliced open and stitched up. With this abuse, my kidnappers had successfully turned me into a shell of myself. I was asked if I wanted therapy to revisit those memories, but I declined. I was happy being Eve, even if it was just for a while. I saw Adam several times, but he was never fully conscious, either strapped to a bed, muttering to himself, or cross-legged on the floor, head tipped back. I was 2 months into my treatment when he barged into my room. 2029, Adam said, his words slurring, is when Apophis is going to hit us. I nodded slowly, dropping the book I was reading. My re-education was going well. I was getting my emotions back, which of course included annoyance. It's going to miss us. Think, Adam hissed, pressing his finger to his lips. Gotta be quiet. Shh. Shutting the door painfully slow like he was in a cartoon skit, Adam stumbled over to my bed, prodding at his neck. They stabbed me, he said in a manic giggle. But I'm not stupid. I'm smart. I'm like, so smart. And it's been driving me crazy. But now I see it. Adam leaned forward. Apophis, 2029, he said, his breath tickling my cheek. Is why we were taken. He burst out laughing. Can't you see? April 2029? 19,000 miles? A big lump of space rock going zoom. He stopped laughing, slamming his fist into his palm. Impact. Bang. Adam's eyes widened, his expression crumpling. Help me, he whispered, before crumpling into a heap and then dragged out by several Eves in white. According to them, he was experiencing mild side effects from treatment. Unlike me, Adam chose to get his memories back. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Olivia's mind was too much, too painful. My old life started to seep back in the form of loved ones as I was slowly deconditioned. I stopped referring to boys and girls and Adams and Eves and was firmly told the new Earth was just fantasy. All of the destruction I saw generated with AI. I have a girlfriend who visited me every day. She said I didn't have to take the therapy, but I know she wants me to remember Olivia. Her name is Charlie, and when I was released from the White Room, she took me back to our shared house. I have 2 roommates, Sam and Matt. Both of them kept their distance for a while, especially when I accidentally referred to them as Adams. I'm still getting letters from the facility, politely inviting me for a therapy session. I'm ignoring them. But I have started seeing a single black van outside our house. I think my kidnappers are back. And I'm terrified. The facility told me to call them as soon as I see anyone suspicious. I've told Charlie and the guys to hide upstairs. And right now, I'm in our living room. It's pitch black outside, but I can see a figure standing directly outside our house. I've turned off all the lights. Every time I blink, I swear they're getting closer. I think whoever wants a new world has come back for me. I'm currently breaking about 200 NDAs by posting this here, including some that stipulate decades, if not longer, jail time for me and worse. But frankly, whatever happens to me isn't as important as getting the word out, getting this warning out, to all of you who live in the United States, and perhaps the entirety of North America. If I attempt to leak the information I have anywhere else, the people in charge of making sure things like this don't get out will sniff it out in a heartbeat and erase it from the internet completely. So, I'm posting this here, on a place that is one of the last they'd possibly look, in hopes that enough people hear it and can warn others while there is still time. I'm not going to tell you my real name or what company I work for, as that would be detected by those that sweep the internet for such things and would send up the warning sirens all around. It, along with the other people's names I will need to use, will be changed with fake names. But what I can say is that I'm a very high-level scientist who works at a corporation that deals in large part with genetics and genetic engineering, among other things. One which has a lot of notoriety and acclaim in the world. Roughly about 2 years ago, as the rest of the world was in lockdown due to the pandemic, the company I worked for was approached by the federal government, specifically the Department of Defense, to assist a top-secret project they were undertaking for something which the paperwork referred to as Project Varanus. Only about half a dozen scientists and geneticists, myself included, were selected for our knowledge, skill, working speed, and most importantly, the ability to keep our mouths shut. They sat us down in the conference room of our building, and after giving only a vague interpretation of what task they wished us to assist them with, in the words of the stooge who spoke of the three of them, to assist with our project on the genetic scale, they shoved non-disclosure agreement after non-disclosure agreement under our noses to sign. And the only reason we didn't question was because of the amount of zeros that we were told would be on our personal paychecks. We would be wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. Greed always gets people in over their fucking heads. After given 24 hours to get our affairs in order, we were all piled into the back of a Sikorsky helicopter and taken to the local airport, where we were placed onto a military C-130. They didn't tell us what state we were heading to, and most of us were too excited about the money and the opportunity to care, murmuring excitedly to each other during the entire course of the 6-hour flight. We landed at a private airfield, one which I'm pretty damn sure isn't on any aviation map, and led us into a large 3-story building made out of black metal just to the right of the runway. This turned out to be the barracks, what would become our home for the foreseeable future. And we weren't the only ones there. As we learned, about 10 or 12 of them were animal wranglers or animal behavioral experts. So whatever we're doing has to do with animals. Yurik, a Russian transplant and fellow scientist and a friend of mine, whispered to me as the bigwigs gathered us all after letting us drop off our personal effects. Apparently, I whispered back, "What do you think the project is?" He shrugged his shoulders. "You've got me, Dexter. I guess we'll just have to find out, yes?" I nodded, and we both fell silent as we were led back out of the building and through a grey metal door which was set into the side of a hill across the way. This turned out to lead down to where we would be working, an underground complex which had to have stretched out for at least a mile or more. As we entered the first clean room, we were met with the first big surprise of our arrival. Taking up its own clean room, which opened to the one we stood in with floor-to-ceiling windows, was a supercomputer which, by all means, should only be in the rough blueprint stage. If you've heard of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Frontier supercomputer, then you'll know that its successor, the Aurora, is due to be completed this year and will only be the world's second exascale supercomputer. Except, it was already built a year or two in advance. The Department of Energy had landed DoD it for this project exclusively. We all whispered in hushed tones as one of the men rattled off the system specs, which I'll skip as many of you won't know or understand them. Then, they led us to the second surprise of the day, and admittedly, even a bigger one than the computer. And, in my personal opinion, far more chilling. Inside a room which, unnervingly, had a row of cattle prods hooked into one far wall, along which, for some reason, a locked case containing what looked like shotguns, was another floor-to-ceiling window. The hit Bigwig walked up and tapped the glass. Our most durable glass, able to withstand a direct hit from a vehicle doing 20 miles an hour. We use it in secure rooms in the Pentagon, he boasted. For a moment, everyone looked around at each other in confusion, wondering why glass so strong would be needed in a lab setting. Until the three men stepped aside and let us finally see what the subjects of this project would be, earning more than a few gasps from myself and the others. The room, or I should more appropriately refer to as an enclosure, was made up to resemble what I could only describe as an Indo-Pacific jungle. I know, since I made a trip with my wife to that area of the world 10 years ago. That wasn't what had earned the gasps though. It was what lay and stood inside the habitat. Instantly, I understood the name of the project, which some bright bulb in the DoD hadn't exactly been creative with. Varanus was the genus of the animal before us. Varanus komodoensis. Komodo dragons. There they were, from what we could see, about 7 or 8 of them. Some were sitting and sunning themselves underneath the artificial lights mounted in the ceiling, while others lumbered around lazily, rivulets of drool hanging out of their mouths. As we stared in astonishment, the DoD man explained the goal of the project. According to them, they wanted to attempt to weaponize the lizards, use selective breeding, genetic modification and animal training among other steps, to create the perfect killing machine for the Black Ops arms of the military in any location in the world. And it was our job to make that happen. Things progressed slowly for the first 3 to 6 months of the project. We took genetic samples of tranquilized specimen and fed them into the supercomputer to map out the animal's complete genome. Shockingly, it took the computer less than a week and a half to do so. Once we had a complete blueprint, we began removing genes and other molecular parameters that would hinder the new generation of Komodos to fulfill the parameters set down to us by the DoD. I won't say every single thing we did, but I will, for necessity's purpose, tell you some of the most important ones. Most lizards are cold-blooded, meaning they can't regulate their own body heat and need the sun to warm them up. Almost all lizards are this way, with the exception of one. The Argentine black and white tegu is the only known reptile which can regulate its own body heat, and thus survive in cold weather without going completely dormant. Using genetic engineering, we were able to rack the tegu's gene up to the point it would stay fully active all throughout the winter months and cold climates. We also removed genes which limited the Komodo's ability to see distinct shapes, and inserted ones which also boosted their visual range, allowing them to be able to see for at least half a mile away from them. We inserted chameleon genes to allow the creatures to naturally camouflage themselves for whatever location they would be dropped in. We heightened their sense of hearing and smell as well, along with increasing their skin density so that, short of a 50 BMG round or bigger, not much could penetrate their hides. The big one that the DoD wanted though was increased aggression. Komodo dragons are already aggressive and territorial by nature. But for them, it wasn't good enough. And so, for this, we inserted the testosterone gene from a bull shark, which has some of the highest testosterone levels in the animal kingdom to boost their ferocity. Finally, all the parameters we were set were reached, and through a complicated process, which I won't go into for time's sake, we began inserting the new genomes into the clutches of eggs that the females would lay, and then returning them to their nests in the habitat. A few more months later, and the first genetically modified Komodo dragons were born. And They were a complete fucking disaster. Some of the animals were born with mutations that made them die off quickly, such as missing 2 feet, or in one case, 2 heads. We realized we'd made a mistake and went back to the drawing board. After checking, double-checking, and just to be safe, triple-checking our work, we attempted again with a new clutch of eggs. As the second clutch began to quiver and shake, everyone from us geneticists to other scientists and animal experts, and even the 10-man security staff, gathered around the window in anticipation. The first egg cracked, and a black head poked out from it, its tongue flicking in and out of its mouth, tasting the air. A few moments later, more began to do the same, and as the first forced its way out of the egg, seemingly mutation-free, we all turned to one another and applauded, cheering, patting each other on the back and shaking hands. "Congratulations, Dexter," an animal behaviorist named Michelle said, smiling and giving me a hug. I'd developed a friendly rapport with her, and we had fast become friends. "Thanks, Michelle," I said, grinning back at her. "But now comes the test of time, to see how they do as they grow and mature." She nodded, and we turned to congratulate more of our colleagues. If we'd known then what we did now though, we'd have likely tried to incinerate the entire room while we had the chance. The animals matured at an incredibly fast rate from then on, reaching full sexual maturity in less than a year instead of the normal 8 to 9 years due to the genetic modification. They soon took up large amounts of room in the habitat, as the 7 specimens which survived to adulthood, 4 males and 3 females, grew much larger than their natural parents, reaching lengths of about 14 feet long and likely weighing over 500 pounds. We noticed a few new additions to the first generation comots, as we came to call them, to distinguish between the regular animals and them, such as their teeth having more of a shark-like serrated edge to them from the bull shark genes, and a more mammalian-like eye due to the chimpanzee genes for sight. Their natural skin color was dark black, much darker than their parents. And when they first camouflaged themselves, it was a sight that caused us to gasp in wonder. We had created a subspecies effectively of the animal. That was where the problems began. See, after congratulating us on our achievements, the DoD ordered us to begin the training process as soon as possible. They had some military skirmish coming up they wanted to give the animals a dry run on, about 7 months out. And so, Michelle and the rest of the animal experts attempted to train them to attack on command. At first, it seemed they responded well to the orders, but very quickly petered out, ignoring verbal and visual cues. To make matters worse, they ended up turning on their parents, killing and devouring all 8 of the natural animals during one night, which led us to walk into the lab the next morning, finding the glass splattered with blood and viscera. The comots had been absolutely vicious on the recordings, moving as a pack to trap an animal at a time in a corner before quite literally tearing it apart. This gave us pause, as we didn't recall putting any increased intelligence genes into the animals, and pack hunting behavior was not only a sign of intelligence, but also a behavior not seen in Komodo dragons. Everyone exchanged nervous glances with each other at this revelation. That was about the time they changed. They began to get downright eerie, if I'm honest. We would walk into the habitat viewing room to find the animals standing still as stone. Still, except for their eyes, which seemed to follow you all around the room, one which began to seem far too human-like and understanding. I know now that they were learning our patterns, our movements, sniffing out weaknesses and vulnerable spaces. Hell, you could be 2 rooms away and still feel their eyes on you through the many layers of glass. They also began to camouflage themselves more and more, seeming to learn how to effectively hide themselves. When they stood still, it was almost impossible to distinguish them from the background. It was almost exactly the way the Indominus Rex from Jurassic World behaved. Only, there were many of them, not just one. We reached out to the DoD to explain our concerns, but they were pushed aside like paper. The man on the phone told us that the 3 who had brought us here over a year ago would be returning in 2 weeks to look at the specimens.
That is final.
The gruff voice finished, before hanging up. We were unsure what to do. The animals hadn't been trained, and their odd and eerie behavior was beginning to sow the first tendrils of doubt about what we had done into the backs of our minds. We had been too busy focusing on achieving our goals without stopping to think about the consequences, also preoccupied by the money we would be making. But we attempted to push the thoughts away. That's when the next shoe dropped. As we entered the lab a week later, we noticed some things nestled in the old replica nests that once held the Komots themselves. I have to stress that normal Komodo dragons, as it turned out, can lay up to 20 eggs at a time, which between 3 females would mean 60 eggs. There were closer to 90 eggs in total in the nests. Okay, something isn't exactly right here, Michelle said worriedly, getting murmurs from the other animal experts. They're not supposed to lay eggs so soon, especially not this time of year. As we stared through the glass, one of the Komots uncloaked itself, the side of its head almost pressed up against the glass. "Fuck me," I shouted, jumping back. I had been close to the glass myself, and when it had appeared, the two of us had almost been eye to eye with each other. That's when Dietrich, another geneticist, dropped the bomb he'd hidden from the rest of us. Unbeknownst to the rest of us, he'd been approached by one of the bigwigs with a secret assignment. Apparently, there were 2 secret parameters that the DoD had asked for in the Komots. The first was an increased level of intelligence for problem-solving and creativity skills using more chimpanzee genes. This alone caused everyone else to flip their shit. "Are you and them out of your fucking minds?" Clancy, one of the animal behaviorists, screamed at Dietrich. "You basically engineered up the apex predator of apex predators, and then you gave it a fucking brain?" Quieter than he had been before, he then told us the second secret parameter. They had wanted to increase the animal's lethality, and as such, had Dietrich insert the genes from one of the most venomous species of snake, the black mamba, into the Komots. 1 bite from the animals would be enough to insert enough venom to kill 20 full-grown men. The discomfort and horror in the room was palpable. I quietly strode up to the man and asked him, in a voice quaking a little, "Do you have any idea what kind of monster you've created?" He merely stared at the floor and said nothing. I looked around the room at my colleagues and at the security standing behind us. After a few minutes of deliberation, I opened my mouth and spoke. "We have to find a way to destroy these animals." I turned and looked at them, now all visible and staring through the glass at me. And they all seemed to have their eyes on me, and me alone, and almost seemed to harbor a sense of anger towards me. I looked down and saw that the speakers which allowed the trainers to try and communicate with the animals had accidentally been flicked on. If I didn't know any better, I'd say they understood what I said. But that was ridiculous. They only understood basic commands, not full sentences. Nevertheless, I nervously flicked off the speaker, then turned back to the group. "We have to find a way to destroy them," I repeated, and began to move across the room to the weapons locker containing the shotguns. That's when the security guards stepped over to me. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't allow you to even attempt to destroy government property," the lead guard said, his face stony and lacking any emotion. "Are you serious?" I asked, dropping formalities. He repeated his sentence to me. I felt a rising wave of panic begin to overtake me as my mind raced with the implications. But before I was able to do anything, I felt hands grab my arms from behind, wrenching them from behind. I felt handcuffs clench around my wrists and looked back up at the head guard. "You're going to be placed into confinement until the superiors arrive here in 3 days, at which point they will decide a course of action for breaking subsection A303, paragraph 36, line 4 of your contract." They led me out of the room, the other scientists looking both scared and upset at this abrupt intervention. As I left the room, I saw one of the guards rest his hand on the butt of his pistol while staring at the group. "There is to be no more discussion about the destruction of these animals," he proclaimed loudly. The symbolism of his hand on his gun was obvious. And then, the door shut, and I was shoved forward. I was marched out of the lab and back across the ground to the barracks, where I was locked into a storage room with a toilet. Occasionally, a guard would bring me food and water, but they never spoke a word. I had nothing to occupy my time with but my thoughts. Thoughts about the disastrous implications of those creatures down below, breeding uncontrolled. Or worse, escaping the military's custody. 3 days later, as I sat on the floor with my head between my knees, I heard the door unlock and looked up to see the guards in the doorway. Behind them lay 2 men in combat fatigues, carrying assault rifles, and beside them were the 3 pigwigs, still dressed in their smarmy black suits and ties. I was pulled out of the closet and held by my arms in front of the 3. "Doctor, doctor, doctor," one of them began, shaking his head slowly. "You disappoint us." He clucked his tongue. "We thought you, of all people, would recognize the importance of such a project. The ability to create the perfect soldier. One that means not risking human lives and winning battles far more efficiently." I shook my head at him. "What you don't understand is that, if you keep those animals alive, you risk something far worse and more disastrous for the area. Hell, the country, and maybe even the continent." But he didn't listen. He waved at me. "Escort the good doctor down with us to see. There's nothing to worry about," he said dismissively, already turning away. This time, in between the 2 rifle-carrying military police, I was marched back from the barracks to the lab as they shut the door behind us. One of the suit-wearing men locked the door out by pressing his hand into a scanner at the bottom of the stairs that I hadn't noticed before. When we entered, all eyes turned in our direction, and I could see the guards had been forcing them to continue working under duress. Many looked like they hadn't slept in 2 days. On the bigwig's orders, we were all forced into the observation room. When we entered, I noticed something that nearly rooted me to the spot. There was only 2 comots visible in the center of the room. Both lay slumped on their sides, their eyes open and unseeing. Instantly, the head suit turned to the guards, his face turning red. "You allowed 2 of them to die?" he shouted at the head of security. The man's face turned pale as he stared in confusion. No, sir," he stammered. "They were up and moving about not even an hour ago." But the suit wasn't comforted. He rounded on Michelle and Clancy. "You 2 are going to go in there under the supervision of 2 of the guards, and you are going to attempt to revive our property," he hissed. They began to protest, but then the men shouted again. "If you do not do as ordered, by the power given to me in your contract, I will have the ability to have you executed for insubordination." The 2 animal behaviorists looked shocked at the men's words, but still didn't move. Not until the security team pulled their pistols out of their holsters. Michelle began to cry, and Clancy attempted to comfort her, but the suit strode forward, grabbed the 2 of them, and roughly shoved them towards the habitat door. "Now!" he shouted. Michelle stole one last look my way, her eyes rimmed red with tears and fear. And then, with the 2 security guards holding cattle prods behind them, they were forced into the habitat. As they stepped forward into view on the other side of the glass, I stepped up next to the suit, rage and panic overcoming me. "This is the stupidest fucking idea, you dumb shit. There's only 2 in view, and there were..." I was cut off as something slammed into the side of my head. My vision went blurry, and I collapsed to the metal in a heap. "Shut the hell up," the suit said, motioning for the MP who'd used the butt of his rifle to strike me to lift me up. As they did, I looked up to see Michelle kneeling down next to one of the comots, my vision hazy. A thought crossed my mind. One that spat through my brain like a bolt of lightning and sent ice buckets of chills to zap down my spine. They have the intelligence of primates. They have problem-solving skills. They were watching us the whole time. They work as a team. I snapped my head up, screaming, "Michelle, get away from it! It's an ambush!" But it was already too late. As she looked up at me, her eyes wide with understanding and terror, the coal-moth snapped up out of playing possum, lunging forward faster than I thought possible with its jaws agape. They snapped around my colleague's head, and I heard her begin to scream, a high-pitched, unending one which pierced my ears even on the other side of the glass. At the same time, the others removed their camouflage, leaping forward at Clancy and the two guards. They tried to raise their prods, but couldn't move quick enough as the three of them overwhelmed them, dragging them to the ground. The other coal-moth playing possum had leapt onto Clancy. Within moments, the glass was stained with the splashes of blood from my colleagues and the guards. "Close the door!" the head suit screamed, all trace of bravado having left him. But again, it was already too late. As with a mix of hisses and low growls, the 7 genetically engineered killing machines dashed out of the enclosure and began the slaughter. I didn't stay to watch it though. When I saw that the 4 in the enclosure were goners, I turned and, with my head still reeling from the rifle butt to my head, sprinted as fast as I could away from the room. I saw a few others of my colleagues do the same, and heard the eardrum-piercing sound of multiple handguns and rifles being fired behind me. Along with the screaming. God, the screaming. It was like listening to the background of a horror movie during a nasty kill scene. Only this time, the horror was very real. I thought fast as I heard the skittering of claws on metal somewhere behind me. I did the only thing I could. I climbed tables and bookshelves until I was able to climb on some ceiling-mounted pipes and air ducting. I was up high enough that even if they could jump, which I would find out a few seconds later they could, as they leapt almost 5 feet off the ground towards me, it wouldn't be high enough for them to reach. From there, all I could do was watch in horror as the coal-moths grouped together as a pack, moving through the facility to kill the few colleagues of mine and guards who had escaped the initial carnage. They always found them, no matter where they were. They sniffed them out. They could spot them hiding in places most wouldn't think to look. Very soon, the entire lab was splashed with blood on the floors and walls. It looked like they'd attempted to make their own macabre version of a Jackson Pollock painting. But the most frightening was when they came to a locker that the last guard had hidden himself in. I know those animals had never seen a locker door before, but somehow, one climbed slightly on the metal, using its claws to hook into the grooves, turn its mouth slightly sideways, and grip the lock between its teeth. It gently pulled it, and the weight of it swung the locker door open. The guard managed to let out a single scream before they were upon him. Finally, they were all gone. Everyone except me. I saw the coal-moths fan out through the lab, systematically moving through each room. 2 reached the stairs, and I heard the click of their claws as they climbed towards the door. A few moments later, they slid back down, trapped by the lockdown the big wit had set up. I let out a sigh of relief. But it quickly died in my throat as I saw one, what had to be the pack leader, move with a speed I didn't know they could possess and crawl back into the observation room. There was a sickening sound of flesh and bone tearing for a minute or two. Then, it reappeared, moving back across the lab with something in its jaws. I strained to see, then gasped as I realized what it was. It was the hand and wrist of the suit. The creature had torn it from its corpse. My mind raced as I watched it move towards the stairs again. Please, no, I thought. Please don't let it be that smart. My heart sank into my stomach as I saw the coal-moth reach the panel next to the stairs, climbing up and using its front legs to hold itself in place. Very gently, it dropped the suit's hand from its mouth letting it fall palm down onto the scanner. After a second, a robotic woman's voice spoke throughout the facility.
Lockdown lifted. All exit doors now unlocked.
Shit, I whispered as I watched it drop back to the ground. And, moving in front, led the 7 back up the stairs. A minute later, I felt the air pressure in the lab change, signaling they had managed to open the door. After about 30 seconds, it stopped. They got out. That was the thought that repeated over and over in my mind. They got out. Oh God, no. They got out. That was how they found me when they came to search for everyone the next day, when the bigwigs didn't report in. They found me clutching the ceiling ducts, almost desperately so as not to fall down to the ground. They ran a ladder up and coaxed me down. I thought I would be charged for the deaths of everyone here, but apparently, these people knew about Project Varanus. They took me out of the lab, away from the dismembered bodies of my colleagues and the others, away from the blood and putrid copper scent of it. When I stepped outside into fresh air, I immediately noticed the huge hole in the fence opposite us. That's how they got out, I whispered. And the man in the suit nodded. We know, Doctor. Don't worry, we'll find them. From there, they made sure I was okay, then made me sign even more NDAs, stating I wouldn't breathe a word about what happened. All which I said at the start, I'm breaking now. Yes, they financially compensated me for what I experienced. More money than I would ever know what to do with. Hush money. But I can't stay silent on this. For 2 reasons. The first being, all of my colleagues' families were given some bullshit cover story about how they died in a gas leak, and the bodies were too contaminated to be able to be shipped home. The families deserve to know what really happened to their loved ones. And second, and more importantly tenfold, is to warn people. Warn you, warn everybody of what is out there now, sliding and hunting through the forests, maybe even through suburban neighborhoods, where they can camouflage themselves. They could be anywhere. You need to be on guard outside, no matter where you are. How many animal disappearances since they escaped could be their work? Hell, how many missing people could be their work? If you even think you feel eyes on you when nobody's around, run. If you think you hear soft hissing and low growling around you, run. It may not matter though, where they're so fast, even if you run, they'll most likely catch you in. Well, you know what happens next. But that's not what frightens me the most. That's not what makes me stare up at the ceiling fan in my bedroom, unable to sleep. The eggs in the habitat were destroyed by the military. They saw to that. But the comots out there can still breed. And we saw how 90 eggs came from just those 7 animals, those 3 females. They can breed very quickly, and they will. And when they breed, they will spread like wildfire, able to live in both hot and cold climates. And as it's almost April, it's almost prime time for them to mate and lay their eggs, which would hatch this fall. That is, if their breeding season wasn't genetically altered as well. All I can say is, I'm so sorry for what I helped to create. I'm so sorry for the deaths of all those who worked with me. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what is to come. A few weeks ago, I started working as a janitor at a research facility just outside of town. It was just a quick, easy job to earn some pocket money before school started again. That was until I started witnessing strange things. I found something that I'm sure shows they're experimenting on humans. I don't know. I suppose I should tell you all everything that's happened so far. Even during the interview, I waited around in the lobby and noticed how deathly silent it was. I didn't even want to breathe since I felt as if I would draw all the eyes in the room to me. I was sitting on this hard rock plastic chair, uneasily shifting as the natural anxiety of a job interview carved a pit in my gut. Trying the tactic of taking note of things you can see, hear, feel, smell, taste, I scanned my eyes around the room. The dim hum of overhead fluorescent lights and whirring of ceiling fans caught my attention first. The lights were giving me a headache. Then, I sneakily took a look at the other people in the room. There were 3 others, 2 men and a woman. They were all older than me, maybe 60 or 70, graying hair and wizened skin, but they all seemed unusually frail, their skin draping from their bones like their flesh had been suctioned out. And it was so quiet. I couldn't even name more than 3 things I could hear. The lights, the fan, my heartbeat. I couldn't even focus on the other senses. I was too distracted by these people. None of the others were looking anywhere but the shiny vinyl flooring, a somewhat vacant expression behind glazed eyes. They were set multiple seats apart, but all united with the exact same expression of resignation? Sadness? I'm not really sure. But it made me feel unsettled, like they knew something I didn't. After a few more minutes, a woman draped in a white lab coat and professional-looking attire poked her head through a door. "June Collins?" she called out, glancing up from a clipboard, her eyes searching the room until she eventually noticed the old woman standing up. She smiled warmly towards her and let the hobbling woman through the door. The 2 men didn't look up. It took another 20 minutes or so for anything else to happen. A different door opened, and a man spoke out this time. He called out my name, and I followed him through a tiny concrete box of a room with nothing more than a metal table and chairs. The interview went fine. He introduced himself as, I don't think I should say his name. Dr. Smith will do. That's vague enough. He asked the basic questions of why I wanted to work there, what I did in my free time, where I saw myself in a few years. I just answered with fancy-sounding phrases I had prepared the night before, and I got the job. There wasn't anything else of note that day. Dr. Smith let me go home, and I didn't really think about the 3 other people in the waiting room again. My first few days went okay. I would just put my headphones in and quietly clean the building all day. There was a rule I had to follow though. If I were to go down in the basement to pick up cleaning supplies, I would have to get Dr. Smith to follow me. I didn't really know why. Until maybe the 5th day. It was an awkwardly quiet elevator ride down, a gentle lull of calming music easing the tension. I assumed it was my fault that the mood felt so strained, since I'm terrible at speaking to strangers, and I feel like I radiate some kind of "this girl is uncomfortably awkward to talk to, do not approach her" force field. However, I ended up noticing how stressed Dr. Smith always looked during that elevator trip. He's not that old, maybe 30 or so, but the lighting in the elevator highlighted every dent and wrinkle in his skin, casting deforming shadows onto his features that twisted his face into an obscured, sagging malformation. He always stands stiffly and tightly clenches his fist, repeatedly darting his eyes to the little LED screen that displays the floor, as if desperate for the ride to be over. It only began to make sense on that particular day. Like usual, I made my way towards the cleaning cart, but noticed that the bleach was empty. Mindlessly, I did a quick scan of the room and saw a spear resting on a shelf in a darker part of the room. I made my way towards the shadowy abyss, but just as I was about to grab it, the silence was shattered by a shrill screeching right beside me, alongside the grating sound of rattling metal. I flinched away and made this humiliating, wobbly yelping noise. Dr. Smith soon came jogging over from the elevator. Once I turned, I saw that there was a cage on the shelf next to me, as well as tiny wrinkled hands and a furry face with bared rows of teeth thrashing inside of the metallic cage. There was a monkey inside. Maybe it was a monkey. I don't know. some sort of small ape thing, and it was furious. It howled and screeched as it clenched the bars and shook the entire structure, hissing at me as if it wanted nothing more than to shred my face apart. It continued to writhe in pure rage, only for Dr. Smith to start laughing calmly behind me, patting my shoulder in a friendly manner. "Oh, you scared me," he chuckled lightheartedly. I was frozen in shock, but he couldn't have been more impassive about the shrieking creature in front of him. He barely even raised his voice to be heard over it, and I could only just about hear him as he spoke. "That's Isaac. Don't worry about him. He's just shy." Isaac, this wailing creature, continued to violently shake the cage and scream at me, eventually resulting in banging his fist against the cage and even slamming his entire body up against it over and over. He just wouldn't stop. I began, desperately trying to regulate my breathing. "I thought you weren't allowed to experiment on animals anymore." "What?" Dr. Smith exclaimed, furrowing his eyebrows concernedly and scrunching his face in disgust as he quickly shook his head. No, dear. You've got it all wrong. Isaac's a friend." My eyes slowly wandered from the screeching monkey to Dr. Smith, who was already ignoring the creature, as he brushed off his suit and turned on his heels back towards the elevator without another word. I don't even know what I was supposed to say in that situation, what I was supposed to ask him. It already took a great effort for me to speak up in any situation, and by the time I had summoned the mental courage to talk, he was already standing inside the elevator, giving me a brief wave as the metal doors slid shut. I was a little confused as to why he left, since I had never been alone in the basement before, but I didn't want to spend any longer down there than I had to. I let out a wobbly exhale and turned to grab the bleach and leave. When I turned, Isaac had stopped screaming. It was so sudden that it almost startled me as much as when he had started screaming and thrashing around. Instead of wildly flinging his arms and legs around, he had just stopped. He had stopped screaming, stopped moving. He was now standing straight up with a tall, stiff posture and his short arms hanging at his sides. Human-like. He had this blank stare on his face. His black, close-set eyes with rings of hazel and a pinpoint pupil remained fixed onto me as he stared with a void, wide-eyed expression. It was like when models in a video game glitch out and revert back to their default pose, you know? I must have been standing there for minutes on end, basically shitting myself as this monkey stands up straight and just silently stares at me after acting insane a second ago. Eventually, I realized that I just had to leave. I was already on the verge of tears. As if trying to break free from solid amber, I managed to rip my feet from their spot on the concrete and step back, not wanting to take my eyes off of the monkey as I gathered the cleaning supplies I needed and dumped them onto the cart in a hurry. His eyes followed me around the room, neck craning to ensure he was always looking at me. Once I had everything I needed, I stumbled backwards towards the elevator so that I didn't have my back on him, aimlessly patting the wall behind me until I managed to open the elevator and stumbled into it, repeatedly slamming the close button as the sight was blocked by the doors. I did end up crying in the elevator, but I wiped my tears once the door reopened on the ground floor and shoved my headphones in, distracting myself with work. The monkey couldn't have been the reason I wasn't allowed in the basement alone, surely, since Dr. Smith had just left me alone with it. I don't know, I feel like I'm losing my mind. You might not understand why seeing some creepy monkey warrants human experiments, but please, just stay with me. Isaac the monkey was gone after that day, and I couldn't say I was disappointed about it. When I told Dr. Smith about what had happened, he had scoffed at me and said a slow, "Right," in an unimpressed tone, like he thought I was lying. I didn't say anything after that, shutting my mouth in embarrassment. I just thought it was one of those creepily self-aware monkeys. The ones you see online that do things like write or put on clothes. Maybe it was playing a prank on me, trying to scare me on purpose. I don't know. The next incident was 3 days later. It happened on the 3rd floor, where I had to wear protective gear like face masks and gloves, since they handled infectious diseases on that floor. I had placed some wet floor signs in an empty hallway and was mopping the ground. Even though it was perfectly clean, I was just bored, while listening to music. A couple moments later, I heard this metallic groaning noise from inside a nearby room, like a rusty iron door being pulled open. Taking out my headphones to listen closer, It was still muffled behind the walls. I couldn't guess what it was, but it sounded large and withered, but still loud. Also kind of like the low horn of a ship. Something like that. I propped the mop up against the wall and followed the noise to a sleek metal door that had various bright yellow stickers on it, warning me of all the biohazards contained in the room. I thought that it'd be fine. I thought that if anything were really a hazard in there, they'd have some sort of lock on the door, right? With that, I carefully creeped inside, excitedly grinning under my stuffy mask as I saw the room inside. To me at least, the room was mesmerizing. Despite the suffocatingly strong smell of chemicals lingering in the air, I stepped further inside to get a closer look at all of the intricate stations with flashy computers, microscopes, sparklingly clean flasks, and test tubes piled on top of the glass countertops. The lighting in the room cast an electric blue hue over everything, making the room look like a movie set. I thought it was cool, but I didn't really understand where the biohazard was. There wasn't even anyone else in there. I heard the noise again. It was much louder and clearer, but still sounded like a deep, rumbling, metallic lamentation. I pinpointed it to the left of me, so I weaved through the rows of modernistic workstations and reached what looked like a garbage chute. A square iron hatch that seemed to lift up with a handle on the bottom. I assumed that this was where the hazard was, since the hatch was also drowned in red and yellow warning stickers. One peek wouldn't hurt. Checking either side of me to ensure that nobody was watching, I gently lifted the hatch open. As I did, I heard the sound again, and it was clear that it was traveling up the concrete tunnel from somewhere down below. I think it was because I thought I was alone that I ended up leaning forward and sticking my head into the chute in order to see what was down there. It wasn't what. It was who. Limbs sprawled out and pressed against the walls of the chute to keep himself propped up. A man seemed to be stuck midway through the chute, a few meters below me. I didn't really process what I was seeing for several seconds. I just stared at the back of this man's head as he looked down the chute. I could tell he was old, with thinning white hair and spotty hair underneath. His arms and legs were so withered that he looked like nothing more than a skeleton wearing tailored skin. I was surprised that he didn't snap, holding up the weight of him. I could also hear an unintelligible, distant discussion below the man. Not so heated that it was an argument, but not calm enough to be a casual conversation. Before I even realized it was happening, however, the man slowly craned his neck up to make dead eye contact with me. I don't know why exactly, but I had almost expected him to have the same expression I saw on those other people in the waiting room, as well as the monkey. Instead, his mouth was hanging open, kind of like he didn't have any feeling in his jaw and couldn't close it. His gaping mouth was entirely black, void-like. He didn't have any teeth. He didn't have a tongue. I couldn't even see his throat. Just darkness. Then, he made the noise I had been hearing. I think I screamed, but I honestly can't remember. I was likely too horrified to do anything. All I remember is the feeling of my heart sinking in the abrupt terror of his limbs suddenly moving, like when a spider suddenly crawls towards you after thinking it was dead. At a nightmarish speed, the man began to scuttle up the chute and towards me with a hostile desperation to reach me. I immediately retracted my head from the hatch and slammed it down, backing away as I continued to hear the muffled scrambling of his legs and arms, growing closer as he rapidly clambered his way up the chute. In case he managed to open the hatch from the inside, I darted back towards the door, even bumping into one of the workstations and almost knocking a few empty flasks to the ground. When I reached the door, I flung it open to see Dr. Smith standing there, panting as if he had just sprinted there. "What on earth were you thinking?" he demanded. I didn't realize it then, but I'm now wondering how he even knew what had happened. It had been seconds since I took my head out of the chute, and there he was. "What was that?" I trembled. My limbs felt cold and numb, like my blood had been replaced with icy adrenaline. Frantically, I kept checking behind me to the hatch, fully expecting the man to crawl out of it and pound towards me. "Look, it's..." Dr. Smith stopped himself and exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose out of stress. "We try to keep dangerous patients below ground, so as not to scare employees like you. That's all." "Dangerous patients?" I repeated, utterly lost. "Rabies," he hurriedly stated, as if that were supposed to clear up all of my questions. He must have noticed the blank, baffled look on my face. so continued. We are working on developing better treatment for the disease, so hospitals sent rabies patients to us for examination and observation. It was in the news, actually. You should have known that already. That guy had rabies? Dr. Smith nodded, but refused to meet my eye. He kept looking everywhere but at me, over his shoulder, behind me. He seemed to be stifling his nerves, which didn't help me feel any better about the situation. I think he was worried that someone would see us, or was hasty to leave the conversation. But I'm not entirely sure. He chewed through his restraints and was trying to escape, I imagine. But try not to worry, they're kept downstairs for a reason. It's safe up here, I promise. I don't think I managed to hide the growing anxiety on my face. But it didn't matter anyway, since Dr. Smith wasn't even looking anywhere near me. It's safe to say that I don't believe him now after the most recent incident. But at the time, it made sense to me. Plus, we have a tendency as human beings to blindly trust authority. As some teenage janitor, who was I to question the man in the white coat with a PhD? I didn't know any better, so I assumed that he was telling the truth. And I avoided that floor from then on. I didn't speak when I went home that night. My parents had asked me how my day was, and I simply walked straight past them and into my bedroom, locking my door and not leaving until the morning for work. I skipped dinner and breakfast. I didn't even leave to use the bathroom or brush my teeth, even though I only thought he was a rabies patient that had been sent in for treatment. Something about him disturbed me to my core. I laid awake that night with his face burned into my mind like a scalding hot iron, the sound of him scuttling up the chute haunting me. Finally, we reached today. I had somewhat recovered from the event after a week or so, but I still refused to go back to that floor. Pushing the thought out of my mind seemed to work, so my life carried on. Honestly, I never even told anyone about it until now, since Dr. Smith had somehow convinced me that there was nothing to tell, that it was a well-known fact they treated rabies patient. I almost felt like I was in trouble for what I saw, so I kept it quiet, like I was keeping my own secret instead of his. Anyway, earlier today, I was in the women's bathroom on the 6th floor, kneeling underneath a sink and scrubbing the porcelain, rethinking all my life choices that led me to that point. I had music blasting in my ears and was quietly humming along until I heard the door quietly creaking, like someone was trying to sneak in. I flinched slightly, feeling embarrassed that I'd been caught humming, and whipped my head around to see who was coming in. I assumed that they didn't want to interrupt me or something, so I paused before nervously calling out, "You can come in, I'm just cleaning." There was no answer, but the door was open a crack, as if someone were cautiously waiting outside. I'll leave, I'm sorry," I said, guessing that whoever was waiting was uncomfortable using one of the stalls whilst I was in there. With that, I quickly gathered all of the cleaning supplies around me onto the cart and brushed myself off as I stood up. When I turned to head towards the door, I stopped in my tracks, frozen with the sudden shock of what I was seeing. That fucking monkey. There it was, standing upright, no taller than a foot or so. It might not have been Isaac. I wouldn't have been able to tell from appearance alone, but the way it stood there was directly reminiscent of when it was in the cage the other day. Now, however, it was blocking the door, just stood there motionlessly, staring at me with such human vacancy in its eyes. I felt an acute sense of vulnerability as the creature glared at me with wide pupils. I don't know what it was thinking. I don't even know if monkeys do think. I was completely paralyzed, other than the violently shaking in my hands. The room felt hot and cramped, painfully contrasting with the ice-cold blood rushing through my veins. I had heard the stories of monkeys or chimpanzees or whatever brutally mauling people, and images of the creature clawing away at my face flashed in my mind as I stared back. My chest tightened as if my ribcage was closing in on my lungs, just like the jaws of the claw clip tangled up in my hair. It only moved its mouth. It was so gradual and achingly slow that I didn't even notice it was opening until it was already slightly ajar, wider and wider, so unbearably slow, until eventually its jaws was gaping. It was black, no teeth, no tongue, no throat. A pitch black hole like its mouth was yet another pupil. I was already crying, already on the brink of throwing up. I thought that I was about to pass out. Looking back, it was only a tiny thing, and I probably could have kicked it away if it had come any closer. But in the moment, I was beyond petrified. It didn't come any closer though. It remained wide-eyed, mouth immensely agape, and completely static for a moment longer, until it suddenly dropped down onto all fours. I let out a brief scream and stumbled backwards since I thought it was going to come bounding towards me. But instead, it made some sort of chirping noise and started biting at something on its fingers. It then climbed up onto one of the bathroom stalls, tail hanging, and hid curiously looking around the room, blinking and breathing. Normal. I didn't let myself stay in that room for any longer. I rushed towards the door as it perched on the stall and paid no attention to me at all, simply acting how you'd expect any monkey to act. Once I was outside, I slammed the door shut and scrambled for the keys in my pocket, shakily locking the bathroom shut. I needed to go find Dr. Smith and tell him that the monkey had escaped. So, I made a beeline for his office, which was luckily already on that floor. The wooden door, a harsh juxtaposition to the rest of the soulless industrial structure, was shut, so I hurriedly knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, clearly conveying my urgency in the franticness of the banging. Still nothing. I wasn't in my right mind. I was convinced that he must be in there and that I needed help. I don't know. I think the fact the entire floor was empty and devoid of life was stressing me out even more. I let out an exasperated exhale and decided to use the master key I had been given to get inside. I had been warned against using the key for unauthorized areas, such as the offices, but I wasn't thinking about that then. I think I was having some sort of panic attack. It was the most awful thing I've ever experienced. I genuinely thought I was about to go into cardiac arrest and drop dead. The key, to my surprise, slotted into the lock with a satisfying click, and I was able to open up the door to Dr. Smith's office. It was messy, like he wasn't expecting anyone but himself to see it. An ocean of papers and files completely covered his desk, as well as 3 old coffee mugs lying around discarded. The empty swivel chair was sticking out at an angle as if he had left in a hurry. And I noticed that one of the filing cabinets behind the desk was hanging wide open, a padlock dangling off the handle. The more I looked, the more apparent it became that he had rushed out for some reason. I wondered if that was why everyone else was gone. The thought that they all knew about something I didn't only further sharpened my unstinting anxiety. The open filing cabinet caught my eyes most, especially the padlock that had been recently unlocked. I had to, didn't I? You can't tell me you wouldn't do the same if you were me. I know I shouldn't have, but I approached it as if it were going to attack me too, peering inside to see nothing but a singular piece of paper lying flat at the bottom. I reached inside and flipped it over. It was all typewritten, which I had never actually seen before in real life. I read on in curiosity, and, well, I found myself throwing up in the trash can underneath his desk moments later. I had to get out of there after that. I know it was stupid, but I kept the piece of paper in my hand as I rushed out of the building. I didn't see anyone on my way out either. Usually, I would take the bus home, but since it was in the middle of the day and I wasn't going to wait around any longer, I walked miles back to my house. My legs were burning and a sheen of sweat was drenching my entire body, but I hardly even noticed. I dragged my sore body up to my bedroom and slumped down against my bed, feeling the smallest amount of relief at the cool sensation of the hardwood floor. That's when I reached for my laptop and began to record this. I suppose I should share what was written on the paper, but I'm honestly terrified. I've been considering the possibility that I'm just insane, that I somehow hallucinated all of it. I don't know. I don't even know if this is saying what I think it's saying. If I'm about to get sued for sharing this. I haven't said the name of the company, have I? I can't get in trouble for this. I don't know. I feel sick. I'm looking at the paper now, and I want to throw up again. I'm sure that I wasn't supposed to see this. I think that this slipped out of a file, and Dr. Smith accidentally left it behind. Maybe he was trying to dispose of it. That makes sense, I think. Maybe I'm just overreacting. I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm rambling. I'm just going to record this and put this out there. I don't know what to do. I'm losing my mind. I feel really sick. Anomaly log. Number 7286015. Date: 16th of February 2021. Name: Dr. Isaac Hughes. Subject: 7286. Age: 73. Sex: male. Height: 5'8". Weight: 106 pounds. DOA: 7th of August 2017. Report: since its arrival 4 years ago, 7286 has been making staggering progress. I, along with Williams and Robinson, had been discussing disposing of it due to its lack of activity. I believe it has been much more aware than we first imagined. It has likely been pretending to be inert to avoid experimentation and is now only operating to save its life. For the first time in all of our research, we have discovered signs of emotion amongst them. Furthermore, 7286 spoke today. I was alone in the facility with just Goodnight and 7286. Goodnight and I had music playing, specifically Moonglow by Artie Shaw, while we finished typing up reports for the day. When 7286 spoke and asked what song we were listening to. Neither of us knew that he could speak until now. However, its voice did not sound perfect, almost computer-generated, and it struggled with correct sentence structure. It sounded a lot like Robinson to me, though I can't be certain. I believe Goodnight conducted somewhat of an interview with it that should be filed in log number 7286014. End log. My older brother Shane had spent the last 10 years in prison, and it looked like he might be in there for the rest of his life. However, he called me recently to say that they were opening up a new early release program, and they would let him out immediately on a probationary period if he agreed to participate. Some sort of new process, an ethical alteration to prevent future criminal activity. God, how I wish now that he had just told him no. Growing up, Shane was my hero. My mom has had a rough life. She got pregnant with Shane when she was 16, and her parents kicked her out of the house for it. Afterwards, she went to live with Shane's father, who was in his early 20s and had a small apartment in the worst part of the city. And he treated her terribly, forcing her to drop out of school and get several jobs so he could spend the majority of his time drinking and partying, hitting her whenever she stepped out of line. But she was terrified of raising a baby alone. She tried her best to make it work with him, but it just wasn't enough. When she started showing, he realized that he didn't want to be a dad and kicked her out too. Faced with the prospect of living on the streets, she lied about her age and managed to secure a lease from a landlord in a nearby building that preferred not to ask questions as long as she paid the rent. When Shane was born, she did her best. As she was only 17 and without an education beyond the 10th grade, she continued to work multiple minimum wage jobs and didn't have much time to spend with her new son. Until he was around 6, Shane mostly stayed with an older widow, Roberta, that lived across the hall from them and was sympathetic to their situation. Then, Roberta died, and Mom decided that Shane was old enough to just stay home alone while she was working, or increasingly, staying out late with friends or on dates. Mom fell hard into drugs and drinking to cope with her situation, and took comfort in the worst men. None of them ever stuck around for more than a few months. But even still, many of them left their marks on my mother and on Shane. Coming of age in this environment of loneliness, poverty, and violence, Shane was a troubled child. He was constantly in detention at school, getting in fights with other kids, stealing, and generally raising hell around the neighborhood. That is, until I came along. One of Mom's short-lived flings resulted in her second pregnancy, another boy, and I was born a little over 2 months after Shane's 12th birthday. Seeing that she wasn't going to change her ways overnight and become Mother of the Year, He took it upon himself to be my primary parental figure. He changed my diapers, did the weekly shopping, fed me, bathed me, cooked, cleaned. He did everything that he could to make my childhood better than his had been. It became his mission in life to be the father that neither of us ever had. At school, he opened up a little bootleg shop out of his locker, where he'd sell candy, trading cards, snacks, and once he was in high school, cigarettes and liquor, just to make a little extra money to buy me clothes and toys. And then, when he turned 16, he took a job at a local auto shop working on cars in the evenings after classes to help pay the rent and our other bills. I never understood where he found the energy to do it all. It was around this time that I started school myself. He packed my lunch every day and made sure that I got on the bus in the morning. With his supplemental income, Mom was able to quit one of her jobs to be home to get me off the bus at the end of the day and to make dinner at night. Now, I'm not sure if he said something to her, or if it was just her seeing him picking up so much of her slack. But she began to sober up a little and made more of an effort to be a mother to me than she had with him. It was too late for her to repair much of her relationship with Shane, but I began not to dread the time I had to spend alone with her. After he graduated, Shane went to work full-time as a mechanic in the shop and started making decent money. With his grades, he could have gone to college, moved away and studied something interesting, made something of himself. But it wasn't even a thought in his mind. His dream was for me to go to college, for me to grow up and do something important. All he wanted to do was save up enough money that he could buy us a small place out in the suburbs and put me through school. So, he continued to work his ass off, and Mom picked up some hours too. They both put money away each month into our future fund, and I ended up having a largely normal childhood while we counted down the days until we could get out of our crappy apartment. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. And just when it looked like we were finally going to be able to make it happen, something terrible happened. When I was 14, Shane got arrested. He was always looking for opportunities to make extra cash, to help us save up faster and start our new life. And his boss, Mr. Franks, would give him side work sometimes. Mostly, this involved him driving one of the cars from the shop and dropping off or picking up a package here and there. He never knew what was in these packages, nor did he care to ask, but he was always well compensated for his efforts. Then, one night, Mr. Franks told him that he had a slightly different assignment. Shane was to drive an associate of Mr. Franks to a house, drop him off, wait for him to come back out, and then take him right back to where he picked him up originally. That was all the information Shane had, but it seemed like a simple enough task, and he would be making double his normal fee for doing it. So, he agreed. Things went alright for the first half of the evening. Shane picked up Mr. Franks' friend at the address Mr. Franks supplied, and the men gave him directions on where to go next. They didn't speak beyond him grunting, "Go left here, right here, take the next exit," at Shane every so often, and they never exchanged names. It was a little over an hour before he directed Shane to kill the headlights and pull into the driveway of a home well outside the city. The men gave him strict instructions to stay inside the vehicle and leave the engine running in case they needed to make a quick getaway before exiting and slinking nimbly towards the house. At this point, Shane was apprehensive. He debated simply leaving the men behind and driving back to the city. Yet, he knew the money was going to be enough to put us over the edge, and we'd finally be able to get our house. So, he sat quietly and waited, telling himself that the man was just breaking in to steal something, or maybe take some compromising photos of someone. But, with the windows down, Shane then heard something that made his stomach drop. Several quick pops came from inside the house, and Shane looked up to see flashes of light in the upstairs window corresponding with them. Gunshots. Shane panicked. He threw on the headlights and tried to turn the car around as quickly as he could. No amount of money was worth him getting involved in whatever he was currently involved in. And he was just getting ready to punch the accelerator and fly out of the driveway when a loud bang on the passenger door made him jump. The man was wrenching the door open forcefully and dove into the seat, screaming at Shane to drive and Get us the fuck out of here. Seeing no other options, Shane obliged and whipped back out onto the road while the man kept yelling expletives. Shane realized that he was in severe pain, and when they passed under a street lamp, he saw that the man was clutching his stomach and his hands were covered in blood. Fuck, motherfucker shot me. Shit, I'm losing a lot of blood. I'm not feeling too good. His voice was faltering with each word he spoke, and he suddenly slumped over against the window. Shane tried to shake him, told him to wake up, but he got no response. Not knowing what to do, he searched for the nearest hospital on his phone and followed the directions to it. He parked on the curb near the emergency entrance and dragged the man inside, announcing loudly that he'd been shot and needed help. Several doctors and nurses helped load the man onto a gurney and wheeled him back into surgery while they started asking Shane questions about him. What was his name? How old was he? How was he shot? Shane couldn't give them any answers. He was in somewhat of a state of shock, and his mind wasn't processing information quickly enough. He couldn't think of a believable reason on the spot for why he had a man that'd been shot in his vehicle, and simply opted to tell them that he didn't know and asked if he could leave. They told him that because he brought in a gunshot victim that he'd have to wait to speak with the police, and handed him off to hospital security. While he waited for the officers to arrive, he thought of calling Mr. Franks, but he couldn't get away from security to have a private conversation. So he just sat quietly and tried to think of a good story. What he came up with was that he had been driving nearby when the man flagged him down at an intersection, and Shane had simply pulled over to help, only then to realize that the man was gravely injured. It might have been flimsy, but he didn't think they'd have any way to prove otherwise, and just hoped he'd have a chance to speak with the man before the cops did, so they could corroborate each other. However, it didn't much matter what excuse Shane came up with, as he was arrested as soon as the officers arrived, before he could even give his weak fabrication. It turned out that the house Shane and the man had gone to belonged to a detective. And it turned out that that detective had been investigating Mr. Franks for drug smuggling. Shane had unknowingly driven the man into an execution, and the execution had gone horribly wrong. The detective heard the car pull into his driveway and was armed and waiting when the man broke into his bedroom. They'd exchanged several shots with one another, and the detective had been fatally hit in the head while his wife took a round to the chest. The executioner must have thought she was dead, or was so flustered at having been shot himself that he didn't make sure she was gone before leaving the house. She'd been able to call 911 and explain what had happened before expiring herself. Given she told them that her husband managed to shoot their attacker, the police had been put on high alert for any gunshot wounds arriving at local hospitals. And when they relayed all this information to Shane as they arrested him, he broke down and confessed to the whole thing. Unfortunately for Shane, the executioner didn't make it. Shane tried to explain to the officers that he had no idea what was going to happen when he drove to the house, but they wouldn't hear any of it. Mr. Franks was arrested too, but he of course had an alibi for the night, and they couldn't find any evidence to tie him to hiring the man. What's worse, Mr. Franks tried to pin the whole thing on Shane. As Mr. Franks explained it to police, he had complained to his employee that the deceased detective had been annoying him and making his business difficult. He had no idea that Shane would try to kill him over it. The evidence showed that Shane had been driving the car, and there was nothing forensically to tie him to actually being in the house or having pulled the trigger. So, they charged him with accessory to murder. With his word against Mr. Franks and no hard evidence either way, they didn't believe they could prove that Shane had indeed planned the whole thing. But they could definitely prove that he had helped the murderer kill the detective and his wife in cold blood. They threw the book at him. We spent all the money that we had on his defense, even though he tried to tell us not to. But no matter how much we worked to argue that Shane hadn't had a clue what he was doing that night, we couldn't prove it. And the court wanted to see justice for such a heinous crime. He was given a sentence of 30 years to life and hauled off to the state penitentiary, with us barely having time to say goodbye. For the next 10 years, I visited him as often as possible, and he called me whenever they let him. Mom and I had ended up destitute again after the trial, and our hopes of moving on to better things were dashed. She fell back into her old ways, and I was left with the burden of trying to keep us both afloat. Worse than she was before, she wasn't able to hold down steady work, and I had to take on several jobs to pay our bills. No matter her faults, she was still my mother, and she had been good to me for years. I couldn't just leave her to die in squalor. Mine and Shane's dreams of me going to college once I graduated high school evaporated. Yet, Shane remained optimistic. It's one thing that never ceased to amaze me about him. All those years he spent grinding when I was younger, all throughout his trial, and even throughout his time in prison, he always kept a positive outlook, always wore a smile. Better times were just around the corner in his mind, and he continued to encourage me in every one of our conversations that we'd figure it all out someday. But I knew he was having a hard time with his sentence. He wanted desperately to get out to help me and Mom, and his living conditions were awful. He tried his best to hide it, but he looked sickly whenever I saw him, and often bore the marks of having been in fights. The little food that he did receive made him ill, and he mentioned that he sometimes had to sleep on the floor if they ran out of bunks. My brother had just been trying to make us a little extra money to improve our lives, and now he was suffering for it, and maybe would be for the rest of his life. Then, a few months ago, he called me and was far more excited to talk than usual. He told me that he'd been selected as a potential candidate for the prison's new early release program. At the time, he had 20 years left before he'd be eligible for parole, but if he agreed to participate, they'd set him free right away. As it was a new process, there'd be some additional oversight on his time outside, and if things weren't going well, he could still be brought back in. But it was a chance. That sounds way too good to be true, I said. What's the catch? Well, they said I have to undergo an experimental procedure, called it being ethically altered. Cutting edge science, they say though. Apparently, it removes your criminal tendencies or something, and can guarantee that you'll never commit another crime again. But the beauty is, I haven't really got any criminal tendencies in the first place, so it shouldn't do anything to me. He was speaking so quickly, I barely caught it all. I was hesitant. I don't know, Shane. I don't like the idea of you being used like some kind of lab rat. And what do they mean, ethically altered? That sounds... I don't know. Is it like a surgery they want to do on your brain? Yeah, I know, it sounds a little off. But it's just a term the prison probably came up with to make it sound nice for the people outside. Anyway, they said no surgery, no drugs. They won't tell me exactly what the process is. Guess it's top secret shit. But apparently, there's nothing physically invasive about it. My guess is, they're gonna strap me into a chair or something and put a helmet on me that'll pulse some kind of waves through my brain and try to rewire it to be more docile. For thinking that he might undergo a procedure that will potentially alter his brain, he was sounding remarkably nonchalant. Dude, that sounds super sketchy if they won't tell you what exactly they're going to do to you. What if it fucks up your brain? What if it kills you? I was growing less convinced that this was a good idea with every word. It won't kill me. They have a guarantee of that. Yes, they said it will change me. But like I said, they were talking about removing my criminal tendencies. And you know that I'm not really a serious criminal or anything. Look, this is an opportunity for us, Jack. 10 minutes. That's how long they said the whole process takes. 10 minutes. And I'm back with you and Mom. 10 minutes. And we can get our lives back on track. I can get a job, and we can save up money again. You'll go to college. It'll be just like we planned. Mom will probably even get out of her shit spiral and start helping out again. His last few sentences made me realize that he hadn't been calling to ask for my opinion on his participation in the program. You've already signed up, haven't you? I asked him. He paused. I love you, little brother. The line went dead. I didn't hear from him again after that. He normally called once every few days, but the phone didn't ring for a week. When I got a day off work, I drove up to the prison to see him in person. But I was told that I couldn't. He was apparently sick and in the infirmary. I told him that he'd been talking about participating in the new early release program and asked if his illness was related to that. They told me that he just had the flu. However, they also said that there was no early release program that they were aware of. Leaving them with a message to have him call me as soon as he was feeling better, I went home with a pit in my stomach. Something was wrong. In all the years he'd been inside, Shane and I had never gone this long without speaking. Sure, he'd gone very sick a few times, but he'd always called before heading to the infirmary to let me know he might be out of touch for a little while. And why hadn't they known about the early release program? Were they lying? Did something go wrong with the process and they were trying to cover it up? Or had it really been so top secret that not everyone in the prison was privy to the information? In any case, I knew all I could do for the time was wait. Another week passed without a call, and I made another trip to the prison, where I received the same story. He was still sick, and I couldn't see him. I was more forceful this time, and demanded that they let me visit him in the infirmary if he was really that ill. They told me that that would be impossible. It wasn't until they threatened to escort me out physically and not allow me back for future visits that I finally capitulated and left of my own accord. After the third week with no word from Shane, I was convinced that something terrible had happened to him, and the prison was trying to hide it. I called up there so much asking for information on him or this program that they blocked my number, and I was on the brink of writing directly to the government when my phone rang. It wasn't Shane. It was someone from the prison informing me that we could come pick him up the next day. He was being released on parole. That was it. I started to try to reply with questions, but they cut me off, just saying, "He'll be available at noon," before hanging up on me. I couldn't believe it. 3 weeks of radio silence, and now, suddenly, he was getting back out. They were really letting him go. I was going to have my brother back. But any excitement of mine at having him returned was tempered with wondering what state he'd be in when we brought him home. They put him away believing that he had potentially had a large part in planning the murder of an innocent man and woman, one of them being a member of law enforcement. What had they done to him that made them so convinced he was no longer a danger to society? I only needed to wait until we picked him up the following day to understand why they weren't worried about him anymore. Shane had been right about one thing. Mom was different with the prospect of him coming home. She only had half her normal morning helping of vodka and actually ironed her clothes, although her hands were shaking so badly as she did it that it didn't help much. We even had our first real conversation in years about how things were going to be okay now that he was coming back. Yet, when we saw him, we quickly realized it wasn't going to be the homecoming we'd hoped for. Shane was different. The smile that he always wore was gone. In fact, all the life that normally filled his face seemed to be missing. He wore a vacant expression and stared into the distance as if he recognized nothing in front of him. When I called his name, he turned to face me. But it was as if he only did it because he recognized the word Shane and not his brother's voice. I wrapped him in a hug and asked if he was okay, told him how happy I was to see him and that he was free. He didn't hug me back. His arms lay stiff at his sides. Shane had always been a big hugger, especially with me, and I'd expected that on his first day of freedom, he'd give me a huge squeeze. I got nothing. Pulling back, I grew worried. "Shane, what the hell? Are you okay? What did they do to you?" I shook him slightly as I asked. "I feel okay," he responded so mechanically that I could scarcely recognize his voice from the AI ones that are used for voiceovers. Just when I was about to begin screaming at the guards that were helping escort him to explain what was wrong with him, a thin, dark-haired woman in a lab coat approached us and introduced herself as Dr. Kochik, head of the new program. "Are you Shane's brother?" she asked. "He listed you as his post-release guardian." "Yeah, I am. What the fuck did you do to him?" I snapped at her. She considered me coolly. "Your brother is one of the first people to undergo a revolutionary new process that is going to change the way we handle criminal justice in this country. No longer will we need to lock away the worst members of our society forever. We'll be able to give them the alteration, and they'll be able to rejoin the rest of us. You should be proud of them. she said with an air of condescension. "That's not my brother." I didn't like her superior attitude. "Shane has never stood still more than 10 seconds in my entire life. Look at him." Shane hasn't moved an inch from where the guard was escorting him stopped him when we walked up. He looked over towards me and Dr. Kochek whenever he heard the word Shane. But then, realizing we weren't speaking directly to him, turned his head straight forward again and stared blankly into space. "You need to lower your voice." She bore an expression of annoyance. "I understand that the effects of the process may be shocking at first, but you'll see in time that he's better off this way. You have to remember that your brother committed a heinous crime and likely would have done something similar in the future had we let him out via the normal practice. In any case, the effects cannot be reversed. What we need to discuss now is the path forward." "Fuck you, lady." I was seething. "You don't know shit about him. He was innocent. He was a good man. And what do you mean the effects can be reversed? You change him back. Change him back now. I don't care if he sits in here for the rest of his life. At least he'll be himself." She was starting to mark some things off on a clipboard, and I could tell she was only half listening to me. Looking up, she began. "Again, the process is irreversible, and you'll find that your brother signed a binding agreement to participate in this trial. He's been evaluated over the last several weeks by medical staff and government officials, and everyone is on board with moving forward with Phase 2, public reintroduction. At this point, you have two options. Option 1, you can sign this, and you'll get to take your brother home. For the first month, you'll call me daily to discuss how he's doing, and we will make periodic home visits to inspect in person. We'll help him get work so he can start contributing to society again, like a law-abiding citizen. You will not disclose anything about this process to anyone, and if anyone should ask how he got out early or why he's acting so differently, you'll simply say that he's been reformed and he was released early due to good behavior and overcrowding. Any violation of these terms, and he will be brought right back here, and you will lose all future visitation privileges. Option 2, you don't sign this, and we take your brother right back inside, now, and you also lose all future visitation privileges. And before you start spouting off about legality or suing us or anything of that nature." She could see obviously the fury in my eyes. "You should know we have backing from the highest levels. Your case would go nowhere. Now, if you could hurry up and make your decision, please. I have several more of these to do today." She returned to her clipboard. I was shaking with anger. Clearly to her, Shane was nothing more than a variable in her experiment. He wasn't a person, a brother, a friend, a human at all. Just a note on her clipboard. An alteration for her to study. But what choice did I have? She had all the power and she knew it. If I fought her or refused, she'd take Shane away and I'd never see him again. And if he had been living poorly before, it would be nothing to how I imagined him living inside now, sitting on his bed day in and day out, wasting away with that blank stare on his face. Wrenching the clipboard from her hands, I signed the agreement. We rode home in near silence. Both Mom and I tried to ask Shane questions about the process he underwent, but all he could tell us was, "I don't remember." I was just about to ask him what he did remember, to see if he even really knew who we were, when he abruptly announced, "I am tired. I need sleep." Again, his voice had no emotion behind it. It sounded as if a computer was reading off lines of code. Wondering now if they had turned him into some sort of cyborg, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see red eyes staring back at me. But I was surprised to find he'd already fallen asleep. Instantly, as soon as he said it, he'd needed sleep. He went to sleep, like it was the next line in a command string. I made a plan to go over his entire body with the metal detecting wand that I had at home from one of my security jobs as soon as we got through the door. When we arrived at the apartment complex and parked the car, he was still snoring. I had to open the back door and shake him slightly to wake him. In the past, when I'd woke him from a deep slumber, he'd always been a little grumpy. It was the only time I was cautious around him. On instinct, I slightly stood back as he opened his eyes, awaiting a tirade of frustration and asking for 5 more minutes. But he just stared straight ahead. "Shane?" I said his name. He turned to look at me, but didn't reply. "Hey, we're home. You can get out of the car now, and we can go inside." I wondered how much of his behavior was due to the alteration, and how much might be due to him having been in prison for 10 years and always having to be told what to do. Okay, his vocal cords made the sound, but it's hard to describe. It wasn't his voice. I know that doesn't make much sense, but I've heard that voice for 24 years. I know the quality, the cadence, the inflection. It just wasn't his. Mom had already given up. She'd started crying on the drive home, and the minute we parked, she'd run upstairs. I knew to go hit the bottle or maybe something stronger. Shane exited the car, and I closed the door behind him. Surprisingly, he started walking towards the elevators, like he knew where he was going. I decided not to say anything and see if he remembered where he lived. He hit the up button, as he should have, and he selected the correct floor once he was inside. When we exited on our floor, he made a direct line for our unit. I followed him closely and watched as he opened the door, just as he had done hundreds of times before. However, he stopped right after stepping through the threshold and stood stock still again. I nearly crashed into him. He seemed to be waiting on the next set of instructions, so I told him to go sit at the kitchen table for now. "Okay," the voice came again. Just as I'd planned to do on the drive back, I ran my wand all over his body and found he had no metal inside of him. I felt his head for signs of stitching or scarring and discovered nothing. I checked every inch of exposed skin for surgical markings, but at least, to my untrained eye, he was clean. The entire time I did my examination, Shane didn't move, nor did his expression change. That blank stare just fixated on the wall in front of him, and I got the expression I could do nearly anything to him and he wouldn't respond. I sat down at the table across from him and started asking the questions that I'd wanted to ask in the car. "Hey, Shane?" His eyes met mine, and it was only then that we were sitting down and I was looking directly into them that I truly saw that there was nothing behind him. Whatever it was that made Shane was gone. I was looking only at a collection of cells, a biological mass that could walk and talk but had no personality, had no life. It terrified me. My voice quivered as I asked, "Shane, do you remember your full name?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Shane Theodore Thompson." It was like he was recalling data stored away in a hard drive. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes." "Who am I to you, and what is my full name?" "You are my brother, Jack Francis Thompson." "How old are we?" "I am 36, and you are 24. I was happy to see that he at least knew who he was and who I was, but that was all the information they could have had him memorize at the prison. I wanted to ask something more personal to see if he really had all of Shane's memories. "Who did you lose your virginity to, and where did it happen?" "Elise Sherman, and in her parents' basement." Now, this story was one that Shane and I had laughed about often. Elise's father had come downstairs while they were in the middle of the deed, and he chased Shane out of the house with Shane's pants around his ankles. It had woken the neighbors, and several of them got an eyeful of Shane's business while he desperately tried to pull his pants up and dive back into his car. But this time, he relayed the information with no humor, no crack of a smile, remembering the absurdity of it all. The information was there in his head, but it was as if he had no connection to it. I realized that they hadn't removed his criminal tendencies as they told him. They had removed him. I don't know how they did it, and at the time, I still wasn't sure what they had done, but I knew he wasn't there anymore. Shane's body was sitting right in front of me, but my brother had died somewhere in that prison. Over the next several weeks, I kept my agreement with Dr. Kochik. I called her daily and informed her of how things were progressing with Shane. There weren't really any changes to report. As she'd stated they would, they helped him secure a job at the local grocery store, and she checked in on him in person twice. She couldn't have been more delighted with the success of her program, if you could really call it that. I surely didn't. Yes, Shane hadn't committed any crimes and seemed highly unlikely to ever do so. But Shane also hadn't done much of anything. He was operating on what I should have called pure animal instinct, outside of being given direct instructions. When he was hungry, he ate. Thirsty, he drank. When he needed to use the restroom or sleep, he did that as well. But beyond that, I had to tell him to do everything. Shower, brush his teeth, get dressed, go to work. At the grocery store, he had to be given specific tasks by his boss, and he was able to perform them perfectly. But he took no initiative beyond doing exactly what he was told to do. And that's what it seemed our lives would be from then on. Shane had given so much of his life for me, sacrificed his entire future. I didn't mind helping him for once, and decided that I would continue to support him in this state, until the day that one of us died. But then, last week, something changed. Shane and I shared a bedroom, and I woke around 3 a.m. to an odd scratching noise. We're no strangers to rats in our building, but this was different, and it was coming from near Shane's bed. I walked over to investigate, using my cell phone light to check for vermin. I couldn't find anything. As I approached, the noise simply stopped. Too tired to care much, I went back to sleep with plans to look into it more in the morning. Yet in the morning, those plans were driven straight out of my mind. It was the smell of bacon that woke me the second time, and I opened my eyes in confusion. Mom hadn't gotten up to make breakfast in years, and Shane hadn't cooked anything since his return. He just ate pre-made meals or leftovers from the fridge. Rolling over, I saw that Shane's bed was empty, and I sat up quickly in astonishment. I'd had to tell him to get out of bed every morning since he came back. What was going on? Then, I heard it. Laughter. Shane's laughter drifted through the doorway. Him and my mom were having an animated conversation in the kitchen. I heard my name through the cackles. Bleary-eyed, I walked in to join them, and saw that Shane was at the stove, happily frying up breakfast, while Mom was at the table smiling and having a cigarette. "Speak of the devil," Mom said, and Shane spun around. He ran over to me, spatula still in hand, and wrapped me in a massive hug. Stunned, I only feebly returned it as he said, "Good morning, little brother. So glad you're awake. We were just talking about the time that you tried to make me a birthday cake, and you mixed up the salt and the sugar." He started laughing hard and pulled back. I was at a loss for words. He was acting just like his old self. Was I dreaming? As he tried to step back towards the stove, I grabbed his face with both of my hands and looked directly into his eyes. There was life there again. But still, there was something off about them. A darkness I didn't remember from before. There was a sudden flash of black, and I leapt back, gasping. "What's the matter, Jack? Still shocked at how much better looking I am than you?" He laughed some more, and went back to his cooking. It was a trick of the light, I told myself. Just be happy that he's acting like himself again. Maybe after a few weeks, the effects lessen or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a coldness in Shane's laughter that hadn't been there before. Whatever my reservations, we had the best family breakfast we'd had since Shane was put away. We reminisced about old times, talked about our future. I nearly cried at how happy I was to have my brother truly returned. After he left for work, I called Dr. Kochek to give my update, and I debated whether I should tell her the truth. Shane's behavioral change was positive in my view, but she might not see it the same way. Maybe she'd want to take him back and do the process over again. But the first words out of her mouth when she picked up were, "Is he acting differently today?" She sounded anxious. Her tone made me nervous. Maybe something had gone wrong with some of the other participants. Yeah, he was acting like his old self this morning. He even got up and made breakfast. I replied. Did you notice anything strange about him? How did you know? Nothing serious. I just thought there was some kind of... I don't know. His eyes looked... different. What's going on? Shit. Just hang tight. I'll come out and check on him tomorrow. And she suddenly hung up. My heart was hammering. She knew something. She'd been expecting exactly what I told her. I tried to call her back, but it went straight to voicemail. For the rest of the day, I tried to act as normally as possible, just as she had instructed. I went to work myself, but had a hard time concentrating. I wondered how Shane would be that evening. But when he returned from his shift, he did so with a bag full of groceries in his arms and announced loudly that he was going to make us a 5-star meal. Seeing his smiling face pushed my concerns down, and I chalked Dr. Kochek's behavior up to her process possibly failing. Maybe whatever she'd done had reversed itself, and she was not in fact going to revolutionize criminal justice in this country. With that thought, I wondered if this might be the last night I'd have my brother before they hauled him back to the prison to do more tests or simply lock him away again. I decided, if that was the case, that I should stop my worrying and just enjoy the evening with my family. We ate, we drank, we laughed, we sang. It was a perfect night. Until we fell asleep. I woke again around 3 a.m. The scratching had returned, louder this time, and I looked over towards Shane's bed. Fuck, a whisper yelled as I sat up and slid back towards the wall. Shane was sitting bolt upright in his bed, with his feet down on the floor. He was glaring at me. There was a malevolent grin on his face, illuminated by the digital clock on the nightstand. What the fuck are you doing, man? I yelped. There was something about his presence. It was dark and heavy. It made the air around me oppressive, and I was struggling to get full breaths in. He didn't reply, just kept watching me. His eyes were cold, and as I stared into them, I caught movement behind him. A shadow was crawling across his wall. A shadow with red eyes and long spindly hands. He opened his mouth, and a voice, voices that I did not recognize, emanated from it. Shh. Go back to sleep, little brother. There was no love behind the words. It was malice. It was evil. My eyelids sagged, and I collapsed back onto bed. I tried to fight it, but exhaustion overcame me, and I fell back into a deep sleep. The next day, I didn't wake up until noon. Shane had already left for work, and I had 6 missed calls and a flurry of texts from my manager asking why I hadn't shown up for my shift. I played the events of the night before back in my mind and tried to tell myself it was a dream, that there was no way it could be real. But when I looked over at Shane's bed, I saw there were deep gouges in the wall behind it. Gouges that looked like they'd been made by massive clawed hands. Something clicked into place. I formed a theory on what they'd done to Shane at the prison. I think they removed his soul. I don't know how they did it. I don't know if it was magic or if it was science. But I think the soul that had inhabited Shane's body, the very thing that made him who he was, has been ripped out. Dr. Kochek never showed up for her visit, and she stopped answering my calls. When I contacted the prison directly, they said Dr. Kochek had never worked there, and told me there was no record of a Shane Theodore Thompson even serving time at the facility. They've abandoned us. They're trying to cover this up. He's getting worse by the day. He can move things without touching them. I've heard him speak in languages I can't understand. I'm sure this is happening to more of them that went through the process. To more of them that they ethically altered. Because I don't think they considered that if they removed the souls that inhabited these people, they left them open to be inhabited by something else.